Why was the grass breathing? That was her first thought. It rippled in waves, tall and alive, as if the wind carried secrets through every blade. The valley in eastern Myanmar was silent except for that sound, the whisper of elephant grass swaying like an ocean that had forgotten its tides. Somewhere within it, a woman didn't move. Staff Sergeant Stella Rivera had been lying there for 6 hours, body pressed into the dirt, heartbeat measured, breath so controlled it wouldn't disturb a single stalk. To any drone or distant observer, the land was empty. But beneath layers of camouflage netting and dried grass, a sniper watched the world through a circle of glass. 30 years old, 5'7", lean, compact, black hair tucked under her hood, dark eyes fixed on a point 200 meters ahead. Through her scope she saw them, a Navy SEAL team moving carefully through a dried creek bed. 4 men, disciplined, confident, unaware of the presence that hovered like a shadow beyond their reach. They didn't know she existed. And that was the point. For 2 days, Stella had been tracking their every move, watching them eat, rest, check their maps, whisper into radios that carried orders she already knew. Not because she was their enemy, but because protecting them was her mission. The SEALs thought they were alone, operating on their own intelligence, running their own war. But their mission had quietly been folded into something bigger, something they weren't cleared to understand. And Stella Rivera was the insurance policy no one talked about. Her radio crackled softly, the sound barely audible under the constant hiss of the wind. Overwatch, this is Guardian Actual. SEAL element approaching waypoint Charlie. Confirm your position. She pressed her throat mic with the gentlest pressure. Guardian Actual, Overwatch. I have visual on SEAL element, distance 200 meters. Holding position in tall grass at grid November Delta 7432. All clear in my sector. Copy, Overwatch. Maintain surveillance. Intel suggests enemy presence in the valley but no numbers or confirmed positions. Keep those SEALs alive. Understood, Overwatch out. Her voice faded back into the silence, absorbed by the wind and the grass. She adjusted her scope slightly, following the men as they moved forward, their shapes bending with the terrain. Each step they took was shadowed by her sightline, each breath she mirrored in rhythm. For 8 years she'd been doing this kind of work, the kind no one spoke about in reports or briefings. They called it Guardian Operations, a ghost protecting the living, a sniper who stayed unseen while others got the credit and the glory. Her job wasn't to be a hero, it was to make sure heroes survived long enough to go home. 143 confirmed kills. Each one a threat removed before it reached the people she guarded. Some said her calm came from training. Others whispered about instinct, the kind of focus you couldn't teach. But the truth was simpler. Stella Rivera had been alone her entire life, and the silence never scared her. It was where she belonged. She'd grown up in the wild emptiness of Montana. Her father, a hunting guide, taught her early that the wilderness didn't forgive impatience. "The earth speaks," he'd said once, handing her a .308 rifle almost as long as she was tall. "You just have to listen long enough to hear what it's saying." She learned to track elk across frozen ridges, to shoot in wind so fierce it felt like anger. She learned patience, the kind that broke most people. She learned that solitude didn't mean loneliness. It meant clarity. And years later, when the army tested her, they saw what that upbringing had created, a soldier who could shoot 1,200 meters and hit dead center. Then 1,500. Then 1,700. They said her calm under pressure bordered on unnatural. But Stella knew it wasn't calm. It was control, born from years of listening to the world until it finally made sense. Now the world was talking again, and she was listening. The sun climbed, burning away the valley mist. Heat waves shimmered like ghosts above the grass. Hours passed. She didn't move, didn't drink, didn't shift. The men ahead of her slowed. They were entering a narrow bottleneck, two ridges rising like jaws around them. Brennan, the team leader, raised his fist. The others froze. One of them, Lou, turned sharply, eyes narrowing at something unseen. Stella saw it too. Movement on the ridge, east, far, maybe 1,500 meters. A glint of metal, the silhouette of men crawling into position. Not farmers, fighters, and they were setting up an ambush. Her pulse slowed, not quickened. Years of repetition took over. She turned her scope, let the glass find the threat. 20, no, 21. Organized. Machine guns, RPGs, and she exhaled softly, two marksmen with Dragunov rifles. They weren't improvising, this was planned. The SEALs were about to walk into a slaughter. SEAL 1, Guardian Actual, Brennan's voice came through the radio, low but tight with urgency. Eyes on enemy force, approx 20 personnel bearing 090. They're setting up an ambush. Request immediate fire support. The answer came, sterile and distant. SEAL 1, Guardian Actual. Closest air support 12 minutes out. Artillery unavailable due to civilian proximity. You need to disengage and move to alternate extraction point. There was a pause. Brennan's voice returned, harder now. We move, they'll see us. We stay, they'll pin us. Options. He was right, there were none. Unless. Stella's hand moved across her weapon. The M110, a semi-automatic precision rifle built for 800 meters, maybe 1,000. But she knew it better than anyone. Knew its breaking point, its rhythm, its reach. She made impossible shots before. Her radio clicked. Guardian Actual, this is Overwatch. I have clear line of sight on enemy position. Request permission to engage. A new voice answered, female, steady. Overwatch, confirm position and capability. You're talking extreme range, multiple targets. Grid November Delta 7432. Distance approximately 1,700 meters. Wind 3 knots west. Temp 94 degrees. Slight downhill angle. I can make these shots. Silence. Then, Overwatch, you're cleared to engage. Priority targets, heavy weapons and leadership. Keep those SEALs alive. Understood. She settled into position, her cheek pressed against the stock, her finger grazing the trigger guard. One breath in. One breath out. 3 slow heartbeats. The world narrowed to a single scope view. Her first target, a man adjusting a PKM machine gun on the ridge. He leaned forward, steadying the tripod. That was his last moment alive. The suppressed rifle cracked. To her, it was barely sound, more vibration than noise. The bullet arced gracefully across the valley, 3 seconds of silence between life and death. Then, a figure dropped. 1. Confusion rippled through the enemy ranks. No one knew where it came from. At that range, direction was meaningless. Her second shot came before the echo faded. The RPG gunner, raising his launcher, fell backward in a burst of dust. 2. The enemy scrambled, shouting orders, scattering. She didn't rush. She adjusted, waited, calculated. Her breathing became mechanical, synchronized with the rifle. A third man appeared, scanning with a Dragunov, searching for her. He had the look, steady, patient, dangerous. She squeezed the trigger. 3. The SEALs, still crouched in the creek bed, had no idea what was saving them. All they knew was that the firing from the ridge had stopped. Brennan's voice returned, barely hiding disbelief. Overwatch, we don't even see where you're shooting from. What's your position? SEAL 1, that information is classified. Just trust that I've got your back. Stay low. Let me work. It wasn't arrogance. It was precision, spoken like a promise. The next 10 minutes became a rhythm, the calmest chaos imaginable. She moved through her targets methodically, each shot an equation solved in her head. Distance, drift, heat, humidity, angle, heartbeat. 8 down. 9. 11. When it ended, the ridge was silent. The ambush that should have wiped out the SEAL team was nothing but smoke and echoes. "Seal 1, she whispered into her mic. "Enemy force withdrawn. You're clear to move to alternate extraction. I'll maintain overwatch." Brennan's voice cracked slightly, the edge of awe showing through the professionalism. "Overwatch, I've been in this job 12 years. I've never seen shooting like that. Who the hell are you?" A small smile ghosted across her face. "Someone who's good at staying invisible. Now move your team before they regroup." They obeyed. But she didn't relax. Hours later, when the SEALs were halfway to safety, movement flickered again on her southern flank. Another squad, 12 fighters moving fast, smart, trying to cut off the withdrawal route. They didn't know she was still watching. "SEAL 1, overwatch," she whispered. "You've got 12 hostiles maneuvering south, grid November Delta 7648. I'm engaging." This time the range was 1,800 meters. The wind shifted crosswise. Her weapon was being pushed to the limit. She adjusted, fired, missed. A spark against rock, too much correction. She recalibrated, half a minute of angle back. The next round found its mark. The lead fighter folded instantly. The rest scattered. She didn't stop. Shot after shot, mechanical precision, human will. Each one a message sent through heat and distance. 20 rounds later, the new threat was gone. "SEAL 1, southern element neutralized. You're clear." Brennan's voice came again, softer now. "Overwatch, when we get back to base, I'm buying you whatever you want to drink. That was the finest shooting I've ever witnessed." She allowed herself a breath. "Appreciate that, SEAL 1, but this conversation never happened. I was never here." "Understood," he said quietly. "But whoever you are, you saved 4 lives today." Then the radio went silent. For another hour she stayed where she was, eyes on their path, scanning for movement. When the helicopters came and lifted them away, she still didn't move. Only when the last rotor thump faded did Stella rise slowly from the tall grass. The wind carried her scent away. Her footprints disappeared as quickly as they were made. Within moments, she was gone, a ghost returning to the silence she'd come from. That night, under a tarp of stars, she cleaned her rifle by feel, not light. Every movement careful, meditative. And as the jungle hummed around her, she thought of 4 men she'd never meet, who'd go home because of her. Not because of luck. Because she had been there, unseen, uncelebrated but necessary. And when she closed her eyes, she didn't dream of medals or recognition. She dreamed of the grass, of the wind, and of the moment when time stood still between her breath and the sound of the shot. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the silence feel heavier after the shooting stopped? Stella sat in the debriefing room, eyes fixed on the table's polished surface. It reflected the soft glow of a single overhead light, sterile, white, and cold. The kind of light that didn't forgive anything. 30 hours had passed since the operation in Myanmar. 30 hours since she'd crawled through the tall grass, slipped through shadows, and vanished into the night. 30 hours since she'd saved a team that would never know her name. Now she was back in a room that didn't officially exist, in a facility that didn't appear on any satellite map. The walls were soundproof, the air heavy with the faint hum of ventilation. Across from her sat Colonel Rachel Foster, posture crisp, eyes unreadable. Next to her, a man in civilian clothes who introduced himself as Thomas Hayes from the Defense Intelligence Agency, though his badge and tone said otherwise. "Staff Sergeant Rivera," Foster began, voice even. "We've reviewed the drone footage. 20 confirmed enemy KIA at ranges between 14 and 1,800 meters, with an M110. She paused, letting that sink in. That's shooting that shouldn't be possible with that weapon system. Stella's gaze didn't waver. "With respect, ma'am, shouldn't be possible usually just means most people can't do it." The man beside Foster smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. "You've been operating in this capacity for 8 years. 143 confirmed kills, Guardian operations across 5 theaters. You understand that what you do isn't normal, right? She didn't answer, not because she was defiant, but because the question didn't deserve one. Normal wasn't the point, survival was. Foster leaned forward. What you did saved a SEAL team from certain death. Those men have families, futures. They'll go home because you made shots that border on physical impossibility. Still, Stella said nothing. Praise always felt misplaced, as if they were talking about luck, not work. The mission hadn't been perfect. It had simply been necessary. Foster exhaled, glancing briefly at Hayes. Lieutenant Commander Brennan filed an after-action report mentioning an unknown sniper providing overwatch. We classified it immediately, removed the reference, but he's insistent about meeting whoever saved his team. That's not possible, Stella said quietly. My effectiveness depends on anonymity. The moment people know I exist, they start looking. And when they start looking, you become a target, Hayes finished for her. She nodded. He studied her, tapping a pen against his notebook. We've already told Brennan the Overwatch came from a classified drone system. That's the official line. But we want to know what you need. What I need. Yes, you've been doing this for 8 years. Alone, minimal support. What would make you more effective? For a long moment she didn't speak. Her hands were still, folded neatly in front of her, fingers calloused, nails clean, skin slightly raw from rifle oil. Better rifle system, she said finally. The M110 performs well, but I'm constantly shooting beyond its designed range. A .338 Lapua Magnum would give me an extra 500 meters of confidence. Foster raised a brow. Noted. Anything else? Advanced weather monitoring gear, so I don't have to estimate wind, and, she hesitated, I'd like to train others. That caught them both off guard. Train others? Foster asked. Yes, ma'am, Guardian snipers. I can't be everywhere. If we had a team, we could cover more operations, save more lives. Hayes leaned back, considering. You understand that formalizing a program means bureaucracy, oversight, accountability. It means you stop being a ghost. I understand, Stella said, but one ghost can't watch everyone. Silence stretched. Foster's pen scratched against a notepad, then she nodded. We can authorize equipment upgrades immediately. The training initiative we'll consider. Start small. 5 candidates maximum. That's all I need, Stella said. The meeting ended without ceremony. Foster gathered her papers. Hayes stood and offered a hand that Stella didn't take. When the door closed behind them, the hum of the room returned, low, steady, constant. For a few seconds she sat in the stillness, her reflection staring back from the table's smooth surface. Her own eyes looked tired, older than 30. In the silence, she wondered, when did the mission become her only language? That night in the barracks of another unmarked facility, Stella lay awake staring at the ceiling. The hum of the air conditioning filled the space between her thoughts. She wasn't thinking about the men she'd saved. She was thinking about the distance, not in meters, but in years. 8 years of missions she couldn't talk about. 8 years of existing in the margins of classified reports. She reached for the locket around her neck, a tiny, dented silver circle. Inside, a photo of her father, smiling in that half-serious way, hand resting on her shoulder during her first hunt. She'd been 12. The rifle had been too big for her then, but he'd made her believe she could master it. He'd died 2 years later. Heart failure sudden, the kind that doesn't give you time to say goodbye. She'd never really stopped hearing his voice. You don't shoot because you can. You shoot because someone has to. It was strange, she thought, how his words had followed her here, halfway across the world, in wars that never ended, protecting people she didn't know. Sometimes the quiet felt like a blessing. Other times it felt like penance. But she never asked for less of it. 6 weeks later, the heat was different. Dry, suffocating. the shattered concrete of northern Syria baked under a brutal sun. Stella lay prone in what had once been the upper floor of a building, now reduced to rubble and shadow. Through her scope, she watched a Delta Force team breach a compound. Dust rose in slow-motion swirls as boots hit the ground. Orders barked, muffled through headsets. The new rifle, a custom .338 Lapua Magnum with precision optics, rested steady against her shoulder. Smooth, cold, perfect. She adjusted the scope, watching movement along the outer wall. 3 armed fighters maneuvering for a flank. She could almost feel their breath through the glass. 2,000 meters. Too far for most, within comfort for her. She inhaled, found that stillness, and exhaled. The rifle cracked once, then twice more. 3 men fell. The Delta team never even looked back. They finished their raid, cleared the objective, and exfiltrated without a single casualty. Stella packed up silently, brushing dust from her suit. Another mission completed, another day unseen. But that night, when she cleaned the rifle under starlight, something new stirred inside her, not pride, not satisfaction, just the faint realization that even perfection had a cost. Every shot that saved someone built another wall around her, another distance she could never cross back. She'd been trained to detach, to think of ballistics, not faces. But sometimes when she closed her eyes, she saw them anyway, men huddled behind rocks, breathing in terror, never knowing the unseen hand that kept them alive. She never wanted thanks, but she wanted meaning. And that, she realized, was harder to find than any target. Months passed, missions blurred, coordinates changed, but the silence never did. Then one morning, a message came through encrypted channels. Authorization granted, Guardian Sniper Training Initiative. Location, Fort Halstead Range, Virginia. For the first time in years, Stella smiled. The idea wasn't about legacy. It was about sustainability, building others who could do what she did, so fewer would have to die because she couldn't be in 2 places at once. 5 candidates were selected. She met them on a crisp autumn morning, fog hanging low, leaves slick underfoot. They stood in a line, 3 men, 2 women, all decorated snipers, all watching her with the quiet intensity of people who'd heard rumors but didn't believe them. Stella didn't give a speech. She just said, "You're here because you're good. You'll stay here if you learn why that isn't enough." Then she walked away, expecting them to follow. The next 6 months would break them. She taught them everything the manuals couldn't. How to listen to the wind like it was language. How to become invisible not just to sight but to thought. How to stay sane when the world forgot you existed. She watched them struggle, not with the shooting but with the waiting, the endless stillness, the psychological weight of being alone with nothing but conscience and crosshairs. 3 made it through, 2 didn't. And Stella learned something about herself in the process. She wasn't training shooters. She was training guardians, people who understood that the hardest part of the job wasn't pulling the trigger. It was choosing not to. She saw herself in them, fragments of her own resilience, her own loneliness reflected back. Sometimes she caught herself watching them and thinking, maybe this is what healing looks like. Not peace, just purpose. One night after the first training cycle ended, she stood alone at the range. The targets were gone. The wind was rising. The stars shimmered faintly above the tree line. She closed her eyes and listened. For years, she'd listened to the grass, to the wind, to the faint rhythm between her heartbeat and her rifle's pulse. But tonight, she listened to something else, the quiet sound of others learning to carry the burden she'd carried alone. For the first time, she didn't feel like a ghost. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Because sometimes the greatest strength isn't in what you can do alone. It's in teaching others how to endure the silence and still choose to protect. Why was the wind colder this time? The Virginia air had shifted, no longer soft and damp like before, but sharp, slicing across the training range like a memory that wouldn't fade. Stella stood at the edge of the field, her breath visible in the pre-dawn light. The range was silent except for the steady rhythm of 5 rifles firing in sequence, her new Guardian snipers, each one locked into position, focused, still. They had come a long way. Months ago they were just names on a classified list. Now they were something else, quiet, deliberate, capable of the impossible. Through the scope of her spotting glass, Stella watched the round strike at 1,400 meters, 5 impacts within inches of each other. Good, she murmured softly, almost to herself. Again. But even as she gave the order, something in her chest felt heavy. It wasn't pride, it wasn't exhaustion. It was the realization that, for the first time, she wasn't the only ghost anymore. By the end of that winter, the Guardian sniper program had become a shadow inside a shadow, a classified capability known only to a handful of generals and analysts buried in secure facilities. 3 of Stella's trainees had graduated. The other 2 were quietly reassigned, their failures buried under sealed documents. The graduates Calloway, Reyes, and Vance deployed to different regions: Yemen, Somalia, and the Horn of Africa. Their mission was simple: to watch over special operations units, unseen, and intervene only when the mission teetered on disaster. Stella remained in Virginia, overseeing communications, reviewing debriefs, monitoring encrypted transmissions that came from war zones she could picture in her mind without needing a map. Every few days, reports arrived. A sniper engagement here, an Overwatch action there. Each success was a silent victory, a patrol that returned safely, a convoy that never walked into an ambush, a radio transmission that ended with all friendly forces accounted for. But it was what wasn't in those reports that kept her awake. Every mission that succeeded because of a single unseen bullet meant another life taken faceless, forgotten, catalogued only as enemy KIA. Stella had always accepted that reality. It was the balance of what she did. But now, hearing it repeated in other voices, voices she had trained, it began to echo differently. They were doing her work now. They were carrying her silence, and that meant they were carrying her ghosts too. The call came at 2:17 hours. Encrypted, high priority, from Field Unit Guardian 3, Operative Calloway. Her voice came through fractured static, urgent but controlled. Command, this is Guardian 3. We have a problem. SEAL Team Foxtrot is compromised. Enemy force advancing from Grid Delta 17, 20+ hostiles. Request permission to engage. Copy Guardian 3, Stella said calmly, her voice steady. Confirm position and range. Range 1750. Terrain unstable, heavy crosswind. How much visibility? Limited, dust storm moving in. I can take the first 5, but I'll lose sight after that. Stella hesitated. This was a test the simulations hadn't truly captured. Chaos, uncertainty, weather and time collapsing into seconds. Guardian 3, she said. Do what you can. Prioritize leadership and heavy weapons. We'll coordinate air support. Copy. Then came the crack of a rifle through the comms, distant, hollow, muted by static. Another, and another. 5 shots, then silence. Guardian 3 status. More static, then a voice ragged, breathless. Target's down, but we've got return fire. They spotted my muzzle flash. I'm relocating. The line broke. Stella froze. Her hand hovered above the console, her eyes scanning the encrypted signal readout. Guardian 3, repeat, status. No response. She repeated the call again, her voice sharper, still nothing. And then faintly a sound, breathing, strained, uneven. Command, this is Calloway, I'm hit. The words sliced through the silence like a blade. How bad? Through the shoulder. I'm trying to move, but they're close, too close. Calloway, listen to me, Stella said, her voice lowering, firm but calm. You trained for this. You know what to do. Find concealment. Stay still. Backup team is inbound. No answer. Just the sound of dirt shifting, labored breath, wind howling through the mic. And then a single, distant pop. Not her rifle. An enemy. The channel went dead. They found her body 48 hours later. Her rifle lay beside her, barrel still warm when they arrived. She fought to the end, took 7 of them down before the 8th found her. Her coordinates had been perfect, her marksmanship flawless, but sometimes perfection isn't enough. When the report hit Stella's desk, she didn't speak for a long time. She just stared at the words, the timestamp, the location, all so clean, so official, so detached from the reality they represented. One of her own, gone. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of something she couldn't compartmentalize. It wasn't failure. It was grief, the kind that doesn't make a sound, doesn't demand attention, but seeps in quietly like fog. She remembered Calloway's first day, the nervous hands, the cautious precision, the way she'd asked, "Do you ever think about them? The ones you shoot?" Stella had said, "I think about the ones I save." Now, sitting in that sterile office with a report stamped classified, terminal, she realized both answers were true. And both hurt. 2 weeks later, the next mission came. Stella didn't have time to mourn. She never did. But something changed in how she spoke, how she moved, how she led. Her voice over the comms carried a different tone now, quieter, deliberate, as if every syllable was measured against memory. The remaining Guardians felt it too. Reyes methodical, calm. Vance brilliant, unpredictable, loyal to a fault. They operated with precision, but behind every operation now hung the ghost of Calloway's silence. One night, while reviewing mission data in the operations center, Stella lingered long after the others had gone. The monitors cast pale light across her face, lines of green code scrolling endlessly, telemetry, weather data, ballistic traces. But her focus drifted. On one screen, the paused feed from Calloway's final mission flickered, grainy infrared footage showing faint heat signatures in the valley. She rewound it again and again, watching the last moment frame by frame, the flicker of muzzle flash, the small movement of dust, the faint silhouette of her student turning one last time before disappearing into darkness. Stella whispered to no one, "You did everything right." She didn't notice Colonel Foster at the doorway. "You've been here all night," Foster said softly. "I needed to see it," Stella replied. Foster hesitated, then crossed the room, standing beside her. "You trained her well. She saved 4 men before they ever knew they were in trouble." "That's what makes it worse," Stella said. "You give everything to make sure others survive, and then you realize you've built something that still bleeds." Foster nodded slowly. "It's the cost of shadows, Stella. People don't see you, they don't thank you, they don't remember, but they live. And that's the only metric that matters." Stella's jaw tightened. "Maybe, but sometimes I wonder if we're saving others just to keep losing ourselves." The colonel didn't answer. There was nothing to say. When Foster left, Stella stayed in the dark. She turned off every monitor except one, a blank screen reflecting her own face. For the first time, she saw what years of isolation had carved into her. The stillness, the quiet erosion, the tired eyes of someone who knew how to disappear too well. Weeks turned to months. The Guardian program continued. Operations succeeded. Reports piled up like echoes of invisible wars. But every time a mission ended cleanly, Stella thought of the ones that hadn't. There were no medals for ghosts, no folded flags, just numbers in secure files. One evening, as she walked across the empty range at dusk, she stopped by the target berm, the place where Calloway had stood her first day. The wind carried the faint scent of gunpowder and pine. The air was cool, soft. She crouched, running her fingers through the dirt. "Wherever you are," she whispered, "you did your job. You did it better than anyone could ask." Her voice broke slightly. Then she stood, brushed the dust from her hands, and turned back toward the barracks. The night swallowed the sound of her footsteps. Later in her quarters, she opened her field journal, the same one she'd carried through every mission. Pages filled with numbers, coordinates, sketches of terrain, ballistic notes. At the very back, she began to write something new. Not data, not doctrine, just words. A guardian's promise is not to be seen, not to be known, but to make sure others live long enough to be. She paused, the pen trembling slightly, then added one more line. "But who watches the watchers?" She closed the notebook, sat in silence. Outside, a storm was forming. Thunder rolled far away, distant, restrained like a warning. She didn't move, didn't blink, just listened. Somewhere out there, her remaining guardians were watching over someone else, carrying her silence forward. And she understood now, that was the paradox of what she had built. The better they became, the less anyone would ever know they existed. It was the kind of legacy that didn't make history books, but it might just save the people who did. That night, as rain began to fall softly against the window, Stella whispered a quiet truth into the dark, one that had lived in her since the day she first pulled a trigger in the tall grass of Myanmar. Sometimes the ones who save the most lives are the ones who never get to live their own. The lightning flashed once, the room returned to silence. And for a moment, just a moment, she felt the weight lift, replaced by something fragile and fleeting. Peace. It didn't last. But sometimes, peace only needs a second to remind you it's real. Why was she going back? After years of hiding behind screens, maps, and encrypted channels, Stella Rivera was stepping into the field again, not as a commander, not as a teacher, but as the same shadow she'd once been. The orders had come in a single sealed envelope. No preamble, no briefing team, no time for reflection, just coordinates. Yemen, Southern Highlands, mission type, Guardian direct support. Her instincts had told her to decline. The new generation of Guardians could handle it. But when she saw the attached name, Commander Alex Brennan, she didn't hesitate. The same man she'd once saved from the tall grass in Myanmar. Now, years later, he was leading another SEAL unit into hostile terrain. Different valley, same danger. And somewhere in her, something old stirred, not pride, not nostalgia, but duty. The kind that doesn't fade with rank or years. The transport plane shook as it descended through turbulence, lights dimmed to red. Stella sat near the rear, her new rifle case between her boots, headset humming with low static. Across from her, two logistics officers pretended not to recognize her. They wouldn't have even if they tried. To them, she was just another classified passenger on another night flight into nowhere. She watched the light flicker over her hands, scarred, steady, familiar. The same hands that had pulled 4 strangers from the jaws of death years ago. The same hands that had buried a student not long after. Every scar told a story, but none spoke louder than the silence between them. When the wheels touched down on the dirt strip, she exhaled once and whispered to herself, back where it started. The valley was a mirror of memory, jagged ridges, dry creek beds, and tall grass swaying like ghosts from another life. The SEAL team was already in motion when she arrived. Brennan had aged. A streak of gray cut through his hair, lines etched deep around his eyes. He didn't know she was there. He couldn't. The program's secrecy hadn't loosened even for him. But when she saw his profile through her scope, crouched behind a ridge, scanning the horizon with that same measured calm, she felt the strange ache of recognition. Years had passed, but his posture was identical, still methodical, still brave enough to stand where others hesitated. The mission was simple on paper. Intercept an insurgent convoy rumored to be carrying chemical precursors toward the coast. Reality, as always, was never simple. Stella positioned herself 2 kilometers north of the seal element, elevation high, sightlines clear. She built a small sniper nest among fractured boulders, layered with camouflage netting that blended perfectly into the arid rock. From here she could see everything and everyone. She adjusted the scope, fine-tuned the wind meter, and let her mind go still. The valley below was silent except for the low hum of cicadas and the soft rustle of wind through thornbush. This was her cathedral, the place where noise vanished and purpose spoke in whispers. Hours passed, nothing moved except the wind. Then movement. A glint on the far ridge. 2, then 3 figures. Binoculars, rifles, disciplined spacing. Guardian Actual, this is Overwatch, she whispered into her throat mic. Visual on enemy recon element, grid Echo 752. Recommend hold until main force reveals itself. The voice in her ear crackled back. Copy Overwatch, maintain eyes, do not engage. Her heart rate slowed automatically. Her finger rested on the trigger guard, not the trigger. Patience, always patience. 10 minutes later, the convoy appeared, 6 technical trucks, heavy guns mounted, men in desert scarves moving with purpose. Her crosshairs drifted from face to face. She counted 28 fighters, 2 RPGs, 1 heavy DSHK machine gun. Too many for Brennan's team of 6. Guardian Actual, this is Overwatch. Confirming enemy convoy size 28, heavily armed. Recommend delay engagement. They'll be in your kill zone in 3 minutes. Negative Overwatch, came the quiet reply. We're compromised, they spotted us early. We're initiating contact. Her stomach tightened. Copy that, providing Overwatch. The first explosions came seconds later, controlled charges the SEALs had planted along the pass. Dust rose in violent plumes. The valley erupted into chaos. Through her scope, Stella watched the firefight unfold, muzzle flashes strobing in the twilight, tracer rounds carving orange arcs through the haze. She moved like clockwork, acquire, breathe, exhale, fire. One hostile dropped, then another. But this time, something was different. A second element emerged from the canyon's shadow, unexpected, unbriefed, moving fast from the west. Reinforcements, at least 15 more. Guardian Actual, she called out. You've got additional hostiles moving from your 9 o'clock, distance 800. They'll flank you in 90 seconds. No response, static filled her ear. Guardian Actual, acknowledge. Nothing. She switched frequencies. Seal 1, this is Overwatch, do you copy? Silence. Then faintly, gunfire, shouting, the unmistakable hiss of comms interference. They were jammed. And she was the only one who knew they were about to be surrounded. Stella adjusted her position, sweeping the scope to the west. Dust clouds rose as the flanking element advanced. She didn't think, she acted. At 1,800 meters, she opened fire. The first shot caught the lead gunner mid-stride. The second shattered the engine block of a pickup. The third dropped the man manning the DSHK before he could pivot it toward the SEALs. She worked through the magazine, methodical, precise. But the wind was shifting, hot gusts pushing crosswise, distorting her shots by inches that could mean lives. She recalculated, adjusted half a MOA, exhaled. Round after round, she dismantled the flank. But there were too many. Through the dust, she glimpsed the SEALs moving, Brennan pulling a wounded man behind cover, another firing short bursts to suppress. They were pinned. Her radio hissed, finally alive again. Overwatch, this is SEAL 1. We're taking heavy fire, 2 men down. We need an exit route. Her pulse steadied. Copy, give me 30 seconds. She scanned the terrain. The valley's western wall sloped upward into a narrow chute. Steep, rocky, but navigable. There's a ridge line west by northwest. Grid Echo 769. Move now, I'll cover. Understood. She switched to full focus. alternating between suppressive shots and targeted eliminations, using sound to draw attention away from the team. Her rifle barrel glowed faintly with heat. The smell of carbon filled the air around her. She was pushing the weapon to its limits, and herself beyond them. Then she saw him, Brennan, carrying a man across open ground, stumbling but still moving. For a moment time stopped. Years folded into that single frame. The first time she'd seen him through a scope, the same posture, the same impossible determination. She fired again, covering his retreat, watching the figures disappear into the chute. Only when the last man cleared the ridge did she lower her rifle. Her breathing was shallow, her ears ringing with the echo of controlled chaos. Then the explosion came. A mortar round struck the rocks 30 meters to her right, throwing her backward into dust and silence. Her world went white, then black. When she woke, the sun had shifted. Her ears buzzed with static, her leg throbbed. A shard of rock had sliced deep just above the knee. Blood soaked through the fabric of her ghillie suit. She dragged herself upright, biting back a groan, scanning the ridge with blurred vision. Smoke curled upward from the valley. The convoy was destroyed. The SEALs were gone, hopefully alive, extracted, safe. Her radio crackled weakly. Overwatch, SEAL 1, if you can hear this, we're clear, extraction complete, repeat, we're clear. She closed her eyes. Relief hit like exhaustion. Then she laughed once, a quiet, broken sound that faded into the wind. Of course she'd get them out. That was always how it went. She looked down at the wound. The bleeding had slowed, but she could feel the pulse of heat spreading, infection waiting for its chance. She tore a strip from her sleeve, bound it tight, and began to crawl. The exfil point was 3 kilometers north. She moved inch by inch, pulling herself through sand and gravel, leaving behind a faint trail that the wind quickly erased. Every meter was a reminder of why she had come, of what she had built, of what she had lost. Somewhere behind her, the valley burned quietly. Ahead, the horizon glowed with the fatting sun. And between the two, she kept crawling, the way only someone who understood duty more than comfort ever could. It was nearly dawn when she finally reached the safe house coordinates, a cave system cut into the ridge. Inside, she collapsed against the stone floor, chest heaving. She tore open a med kit, injected morphine, cleaned the wound with trembling hands. The pain dulled, then blurred. The world around her slowed. In that haze, her thoughts drifted to Calloway, to the others, to Brennan's voice crackling through static. She remembered his words years ago, "Who the hell are you?" And her own answer, "Someone who's very good at her job." But now, bleeding in the dark, she wondered if that was true, or just a lie she'd told herself to make the loneliness bearable. She thought about the guardians out there now, scattered across continents, watching others the way she once had. Each one alone, each one invisible. And she realized that this silence, this isolation, this endless cycle of saving without being seen, was both her creation and her cage. She whispered into the dark, "You can't save everyone, not forever." The words echoed back off the stone, thin and fragile. Then she closed her eyes. Outside, the wind shifted again, carrying dust and memory through the valley. Hours later, a helicopter's rotors beat faintly in the distance. She forced herself upright, fired a flare, and waited as the aircraft descended in a cloud of sand. Medics jumped out, rushing toward her, voices blurred, hands steadied her shoulders. She tried to speak but only managed a whisper. They made it out right. One medic nodded, "Yes, ma'am, all of them." A faint smile crossed her lips, "Good." Her head dropped back against the stretcher as they lifted her into the chopper. The engine roared, the world tilted. Through half-closed eyes, she watched the valley shrink below, a scar on the earth that looked almost peaceful from above. She thought of the grass in Myanmar, the students she'd trained, the ghosts she carried. And she realized that every mission, every shot, every invisible moment had been leading here, to this quiet truth. That sometimes the act of saving others means losing small pieces of yourself, one operation at a time. But if those pieces build a wall strong enough to keep someone else alive, maybe that's not loss. Maybe that's legacy. The helicopter banked west, sunlight breaking over the horizon. Stella closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about distance, wind, or range. She was thinking about home. Not a place, a promise. The kind whispered in silence, honored in blood, and kept by those who were never meant to be seen. And as the rotors carried her toward safety, she thought one last time of the words her father had taught her long ago, the only ones that ever made sense. You don't shoot because you can. You shoot because someone has to. Then the world went quiet again. Why did the silence in hospitals always sound different? Not peaceful, not safe, just hollow like the echo after a gunshot that never really fades. Stella Rivera woke to that kind of silence. White walls, white light, the faint hum of a heart monitor keeping time with the breathing she didn't remember learning again. The wound in her leg burned every time she moved, a slow, dull fire that reminded her she was still alive. She lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the paint the way she once traced wind patterns across rifle scopes. Every sound became amplified, the soft squeak of rubber soles outside the door, the click of a chart being updated, the far-off murmur of someone laughing in another ward. Laughter, it felt foreign. When the door finally opened, it wasn't a nurse. It was Colonel Foster. Same crisp posture, same eyes that saw too much and said too little. "You look like hell," Foster said softly. "Feel worse?" That's usually how surviving goes. The colonel pulled up a chair, sat beside the bed, and set a folder on her lap. The cover read classified, EYES only. "You saved Brennan's team again. They walked out without a scratch." Stella turned her head toward the window, the sunlight cutting through blinds in thin, even stripes. Then it was worth it. Foster hesitated. "At what cost?" "I'm still breathing, ma'am." "That's not what I meant." Neither of them spoke for a while. Outside, a helicopter passed overhead, the low thump vibrating through the floor. Finally, Foster slid the folder toward her. "Command wants a full debrief once you're cleared. They're calling it Yemen Overwatch Incident 42. B. They're already writing the citations you'll never receive." Stella smiled faintly. "Figures." Foster studied her. "You've been doing this a long time. 8 years of field work, 3 of training, another 2 managing the program. I need to ask you something off the record." "Go ahead." "Why keep doing it?" Stella thought about that for a long moment. The machines kept beeping. The sunlight kept shifting. "Because if I don't," she said quietly, "someone else won't come home." "That answer used to sound noble," Foster said. "Now it just sounds tired." Stella turned her eyes back to the ceiling. Maybe that's what happens when noble lasts too long. She was discharged 3 weeks later with a cane, a list of follow-up appointments she'd never attend, and orders to take an indefinite period of rest. Rest, the one thing she'd never trained for. The facility they gave her was a cabin hidden deep in Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains, government property, disguised as nothing at all. Pine trees framed the windows. A creek murmured somewhere out of sight. It was beautiful in the way solitude sometimes is, too quiet to be comforting. She tried reading, couldn't. Tried sleeping, couldn't. Every night she'd wake to the same sound, not of gunfire, but of wind passing through tall grass. She'd lie there, half dreaming, half remembering Myanmar, Yemen, all the places between. Faces she'd never seen clearly, voices that came only through radios. Sometimes she'd whisper into the dark, Calloway, you would have loved this place. But the wind never answered. After 2 months, she couldn't take the stillness anymore. She returned to the Guardian training compound without orders, Kane tapping softly against the concrete floor of the firing line. The recruits stopped shooting when they saw her. Word traveled fast the founder was back. Reyes and Vance were there too, both home between rotations. Reyes was the first to speak. "Ma'am, we heard Yemen was bad." "It was," she said simply. "You shouldn't be on that leg." "I've had worse." Vance stepped forward, voice low. "You shouldn't have gone at all. That was our job." Stella looked at him, young, fierce, angry in the way soldiers get when they're afraid of caring too much. "I couldn't send you," she said. "Not for him." "Commander Brennan." She nodded. "Some debts don't expire." Vance shook his head, frustrated. "We're supposed to be a unit. You taught us that." "I taught you to survive," she corrected. "Sometimes that means breaking your own rules." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. They all understood what she meant and what it cost. That night after the range went dark, Stella stayed behind. She moved slowly, testing the leg, setting up a single target at 2,000 meters, an impossible distance in the old days but not for the Guardians. She lay prone, adjusted the scope, and breathed in the cold air. The stars were bright enough to paint silver lines across the rifle's barrel. She fired once. The round cut through the dark, vanishing into distance. A moment later, the metallic ping echoed faintly back. "Dead center." She lowered the rifle, eyes closing. The sound was beautiful, not because it meant she still had it, but because it reminded her she was still part of something she couldn't explain. She whispered, almost praying, "Just one more right shot, always one more." The next morning, Colonel Foster arrived unannounced. 2 SUVs, no insignia, no smiles. "Stella," she said as they walked the perimeter, "Command wants to shut down Guardian." Stella stopped. "Why?" "Because they can't control it anymore. Too many moving parts, too much dependence on people they can't officially acknowledge. So the invisible program became too visible." "Exactly." Stella looked out across the range. Reyes and Vance were cleaning rifles in the distance, laughing at something. For a second it looked almost normal. "What happens to them?" "They'll be reassigned. Maybe conventional sniper units, maybe private contracts. You know how this works." "And me?" Foster hesitated. "Retirement, full benefits, quiet exit." Stella nodded slowly. The perfect way to erase a shadow. That night she sat by the creek behind the cabin. The moon hung low, the air cool against her skin. The leg ached, but not enough to matter. She thought about everything the colonel had said, about endings, about erasure. And she thought about what would happen when the Guardians were gone, when no one watched from the distance, when no one rose from the grass. Maybe someone else would fill that space, maybe no one would. Either way, the world would keep spinning, and the quiet war would go on, just without the people who had learned how to fight it silently. She skipped a stone across the creek. It made 3 perfect jumps before vanishing beneath the surface. That was how most of her life felt. 3 bright impacts, then gone. Days turned into weeks. No new missions, no new reports, just silence. Until one evening, as the sun fell behind the ridge, her encrypted satellite phone buzzed. She hesitated before answering. "Rivera." A familiar voice crackled through, "Commander Brennan." "I was told not to call," he said, "but I needed to." Stella's throat tightened. "How did you even get this number?" "I still know people who owe you their lives." Silence stretched between them. Finally he said, "They're shutting your program down, aren't they?" "Seems that way." "That's a mistake. We don't make it home without people like you. People like me aren't supposed to exist." "Maybe that's the problem." Stella didn't answer. She could hear wind on his end, maybe the deck of a carrier, maybe another operation waiting to begin. "I never got to thank you," he said quietly. "For Myanmar, for Yemen, for all of it." "You don't have to." "I do, because I finally understand something." "What's that?" "That strength isn't about who pulls the trigger. It's about who's willing to stay unseen to make sure others don't have to." She closed her eyes. The words hit somewhere deep, somewhere she'd buried long ago. "Take care of your team, Commander," she said. "Always, you take care of yourself, Guardian." The line went dead. For a long time she sat there, the phone still warm in her hand. Then she looked up at the sky, the same one she'd watched through scopes and dust and storm clouds. And she realized something simple. The program might end, the titles might fade, but the idea, the belief that quiet courage mattered would never disappear. Because it wasn't about rifles or ranks, it was about choice. The choice to act when no one was watching. She whispered to the night, "That's what a guardian is. Not a soldier, not a ghost, just someone who refuses to look away." The creek kept moving, the stars kept burning. And for the first time in years, Stella Rivera let herself rest. Not because the war was over, but because she'd finally learned how to stop carrying it alone. Sometimes the hardest part of survival isn't staying alive. It's learning what to do with the silence afterward. And sometimes the silence isn't punishment. It's proof you did your job. Why do some calls sound heavier than others? It came just before dawn. A coded transmission sent through an encrypted satellite channel she thought had been deactivated months ago. 4 numbers, 2 words. Emergency activation. Stella Rivera stared at the flickering text on the monitor in her cabin, the coffee in her hand gone cold. She hadn't seen that frequency since the Guardian program had been shut down. Her first instinct was to ignore it. Her second was to remember that she'd built the damn system herself. She keyed the terminal manually, the old password still muscle memory. A message unfolded, line by line. Guardian priority alert. Yemen, hostage extraction. Unconfirmed target, Guardian operative Reyes. Her breath caught. Reyes. One of hers. For a long moment she just sat there. The morning light was creeping through the blinds, washing the room in pale gold, but it felt distant, unreal. She read the message again. And again. Then she closed the laptop, stood, and began to pack. No hesitation, no debate, just that quiet, familiar motion. Rifle case, sidearm, notebook, folded ghillie netting, morphine ampules. The routine of someone who didn't know how to live without purpose. By the time the sun had cleared the ridge, she was already gone. 3 days later, Stella stood on a windswept plateau in northern Oman, waiting for a helicopter that wasn't supposed to exist. Colonel Foster stepped out first. The uniform was the same, but the face had changed, older, harder. "I figured you'd come," Foster said over the rotor wash. "You knew I would." Foster nodded. Reyes was embedded with a joint task force in southern Yemen. Operation went sideways. He radioed once, said he was compromised but still had visual on hostages. Then silence. "Enemy." Militant cell calling themselves the Khalid Front. They've taken an oil site facility near the coast. Locals say they're expecting an American rescue. They're ready for it. "Then don't send a rescue," Stella said. Foster looked at her. "You're proposing to go alone." "I trained him. If he's alive, he'll be holding position, waiting for eyes he trusts. I'm the only one who can find him." The colonel studied her for a moment. "You're not cleared for field work. You still have a medical flag on your file." "Then don't file it," Stella said quietly. After a long pause, Foster handed her a data chip. "Satellite feed, thermal recon. You'll be on your own, same as always." "Wouldn't have it any other way." She crossed the border at night, moving through the desert under a crescent moon. The air was dry enough to burn her lungs. Every step sent a dull pulse of pain through her damaged leg, but she kept moving. The valley came into view near dawn, low buildings, rusted oil tanks, 2 trucks with mounted guns. Through her thermal scope she counted 8 heat signatures on the roof, more inside. No sign of Reyes. But she recognized the layout. One central tower, elevated storage tanks, and a narrow drainage trench cutting through the compound. Perfect for concealment, perfect for a sniper. If Reyes was alive, that's where he'd be. She spent the next 6 hours observing. The militants moved in predictable rotations, 2 on patrol, 6 guarding the hostages inside, another 4 manning the perimeter. Through her scope she could see the hostages, 5 of them, Western engineers bound but unharmed. Still no Reyes. At noon, a sudden movement caught her eye, a glint of metal on the far ridge. Not the militants' side, the opposite slope. She shifted focus, magnified, and there it was. A faint shimmer of heat behind a rock formation, barely visible, a rifle barrel. Her heart stuttered. "Reyes," she whispered. He was alive, barely visible, camouflaged almost perfectly, but she knew his signature. The way he'd positioned slightly off-center, compensating for mirage distortion. She taught him that. He was watching the compound, waiting for a signal that wasn't coming. She keyed her mic on an encrypted frequency they'd used in training, the one no one else knew. "Guardian 3, this is Overwatch. Do you copy?" "Static, then Overwatch, that you." His voice was weak, cracked from dehydration. "I'm here," she said. "I've got eyes on your position. What's your status?" "Low on water, 2 mags left. Legs busted, I can't move." "Hostages alive?" "5, inside the main building. They're rigging it with explosives. I tried to take the shot on the detonator, but wind's too strong from my side." "I can cover it," she said. "Overwatch, you shouldn't even be here." "Neither should you. Stay put. I'll handle the rest." Stella repositioned along the ridge, crawling through dust and loose rock until she found an angle with partial line of sight on the main building. She unfolded the bipod, chambered around, and checked the distance. 2,030 meters. A headwind from the south, temperature 96, mirage distortion severe. Almost impossible. She smiled faintly, my favorite kind. Through her scope she could see the detonator, a small box near the doorway, wires running to drums of fuel. One wrong shot and the hostages would vanish in flame. She slowed her breathing, counted heartbeats. Inhale, exhale. The rifle cracked once. The bullet flew, arcing, drifting, time stretching into silence. Impact. The detonator sparked once and died. "Perfect." Reyes' voice came through, ragged but alive. "Direct hit. You just saved 5 people and my sorry ass." "Wouldn't be the first time," she said. But as she watched, movement flickered, a militant running toward Reyes' ridge, rifle raised. They must have traced the sound. She swung the scope, found the runner, and fired. The man dropped mid-stride. But others were following, 4, 6, 10. "Too many." "Reyes, you're compromised," she said. "They're coming from your east flank. Move now." "Can't, legs gone. I'll hold them as long as I can." "Negative, you move, that's an order." "Overwatch." "Move." She switched frequencies. "Guardian Actual, this is Overwatch. Request emergency extraction. 1 friendly operative wounded, active engagement. Coordinates uploading now." No response. The network she'd once commanded no longer existed. There was no one left to call. She made her decision in less than a second. She left the rifle in position, set the scope to watch over Reyes' ridge, and began descending the slope. Every step sent fire through her leg, but she didn't stop. Rocks slipped under her boots, sand cutting through her gloves. She moved fast, too fast for someone half-healed, driven by a force that had nothing to do with orders. At 400 meters, she could hear the gunfire short bursts, echoing against the canyon walls. She spotted him behind a rock, firing single shots, blood seeping through his pant leg. Reyes. He turned, disbelief flashing in his eyes. You, what the hell are you doing here? Returning a favor. She dropped beside him, leveled her sidearm, and took down the nearest militant. They fought like ghosts, two invisible figures hidden by terrain and skill, cutting down enemies they couldn't afford to count. When it was over, the valley was silent again. Reyes slumped back, breathing hard. You shouldn't have come. Tell that to the hostages, she said, pulling a tourniquet from her pack and cinching it around his thigh. He winced. They'll court-martial you for this. Can't court-martial what doesn't exist. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a wheeze. An hour later, the sound of rotor blades cut through the heat haze. Foster had come through after all, an unmarked medevac dropping into the valley like salvation disguised as noise. The downwash threw sand into Stella's face as medics rushed them both. Reyes grabbed her wrist before they lifted him. You always said the hardest part wasn't pulling the trigger. She nodded. It's deciding when to stop. Did you? He asked. She hesitated. Maybe this time. He smiled faintly. Then you finally taught yourself something. They took him away first. When the medic turned to her, she shook her head. I can walk. But when she stood, her leg nearly gave out. The medic caught her arm. Ma'am, you're bleeding. She looked down. Her sleeve was soaked crimson. Shrapnel, she hadn't even felt it. She laughed once. Always something. They got her aboard. In the helicopter, Foster sat across from her, headset pressed tight, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. You disobeyed every order you've ever been given, she said over the engine noise. Wouldn't be the first time. Foster's expression softened. You saved him. You saved the hostages. That's not what this was about, was it? Stella stared out the window, the desert stretching endless and gold beneath them. It was about finishing the story right, she said. Foster nodded slowly. Command will never acknowledge this. I don't need them to. Then what do you need? Stella looked back at her. Closure. When the helicopter reached the coast, the light was changing, orange bleeding into blue, the sea catching fire under the sunset. Reyes was loaded into another craft, bound for a hospital. Stella stayed behind on the landing pad, her cane forgotten somewhere in the dust. Foster approached quietly. You know this is it, right? There won't be another call. I know. Then what will you do now? Stella looked out at the horizon, where the sun sank into the water like a slow promise. Disappear properly this time, she said. Maybe teach somewhere quiet. Maybe just listen to the wind for once instead of measuring it. Foster nodded. If anyone's earned that, it's you. They stood there for a long moment, saying nothing. The ocean wind tugged at their sleeves, carrying sand and salt and memory. Finally, Foster said, We'll leave your record sealed, but some of us will remember. Stella smiled. That's enough. That night, from the window of the small coastal base, she watched the lights of a cargo ship drifting across the dark water. For the first time, she felt no urge to move toward it, no itch to chase the next mission. She realized the war inside her had gone quiet. Not gone, just quiet. And that was enough. Because sometimes the final act of service isn't saving anyone else. It's allowing yourself to be saved by the silence you've earned. Somewhere far inland, the desert wind still whispered through the tall grass of forgotten valleys. And if you listened closely, you might think you heard a voice in that wind, calm, steady, unafraid. Not speaking, just watching. The kind of voice that never needed recognition. Only purpose. Sometimes the mission ends. Sometimes it doesn't. But the true guardian always knows when to put the rifle down and let the world keep turning without her. Because dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why do some calls sound heavier than others? It came just before dawn. A coded transmission sent through an encrypted satellite channel she thought had been deactivated months ago. 4 numbers, 2 words. Emergency activation. Stella Rivera stared at the flickering text on the monitor in her cabin, the coffee in her hand gone cold. She hadn't seen that frequency since the Guardian program had been shut down. Her first instinct was to ignore it. Her second was to remember that she'd built the damn system herself. She keyed the terminal manually, the old password still muscle memory. A message unfolded, line by line. Guardian priority alert. Yemen, hostage extraction. Unconfirmed target, Guardian operative Reyes. Her breath caught. Reyes. One of hers. For a long moment she just sat there. The morning light was creeping through the blinds, washing the room in pale gold, but it felt distant, unreal. She read the message again. And again. Then she closed the laptop, stood, and began to pack. No hesitation, no debate, just that quiet, familiar motion. Rifle case, sidearm, notebook, folded ghillie netting, morphine ampules. The routine of someone who didn't know how to live without purpose. By the time the sun had cleared the ridge, she was already gone. 3 days later, Stella stood on a windswept plateau in northern Oman, waiting for a helicopter that wasn't supposed to exist. Colonel Foster stepped out first. The uniform was the same, but the face had changed, older, harder. "I figured you'd come," Foster said over the rotor wash. "You knew I would." Foster nodded. Reyes was embedded with a joint task force in southern Yemen. Operation went sideways. He radioed once, said he was compromised but still had visual on hostages. Then silence. Enemy. Militant cell calling themselves the Khalid Front. They've taken an oil site facility near the coast. Locals say they're expecting an American rescue. They're ready for it. Then don't send a rescue, Stella said. Foster looked at her. You're proposing to go alone. I trained him. If he's alive, he'll be holding position, waiting for eyes he trusts. I'm the only one who can find him. The colonel studied her for a moment. You're not cleared for field work. You still have a medical flag on your file. Then don't file it, Stella said quietly. After a long pause, Foster handed her a data chip. Satellite feed, thermal recon. You'll be on your own, same as always. Wouldn't have it any other way. She crossed the border at night, moving through the desert under a crescent moon. The air was dry enough to burn her lungs. Every step sent a dull pulse of pain through her damaged leg, but she kept moving. The valley came into view near dawn, low buildings, rusted oil tanks, 2 trucks with mounted guns. Through her thermal scope she counted 8 heat signatures on the roof, more inside. No sign of Reyes. But she recognized the layout. 1 central tower, elevated storage tanks, and a narrow drainage trench cutting through the compound. Perfect for concealment, perfect for a sniper. If Reyes was alive, that's where he'd be. She spent the next 6 hours observing. The militants moved in predictable rotations, 2 on patrol, 6 guarding the hostages inside, another 4 manning the perimeter. Through her scope she could see the hostages, 5 of them, Western engineers bound but unharmed. Still no Reyes. At noon a sudden movement caught her eye, a glint of metal on the far ridge. Not the militants' side, the opposite slope. She shifted focus, magnified, and there it was. A faint shimmer of heat behind a rock formation, barely visible. A rifle barrel. Her heart stuttered. Reyes, she whispered. He was alive, barely visible, camouflaged almost perfectly, but she knew his signature. The way he'd positioned slightly off-center, compensating for mirage distortion. She taught him that. He was watching the compound, waiting for a signal that wasn't coming. She keyed her mic on an encrypted frequency they'd used in training, the one no one else knew. Guardian 3, this is Overwatch. Do you copy? Static, then Overwatch, that you. His voice was weak, cracked from dehydration. I'm here, she said. I've got eyes on your position. What's your status? Low on water, 2 mags left. Legs busted, I can't move. Hostages alive. 5, inside the main building. They're rigging it with explosives. I tried to take the shot on the detonator, but wind's too strong from my side. I can cover it, she said. Overwatch, you shouldn't even be here. Neither should you. Stay put. I'll handle the rest. Stella repositioned along the ridge, crawling through dust and loose rock until she found an angle with partial line of sight on the main building. She unfolded the bipod, chambered around and checked the distance. 2,030 meters. A headwind from the south, temperature 96, mirage distortion severe. Almost impossible. She smiled faintly, my favorite kind. Through her scope she could see the detonator, a small box near the doorway, wires running to drums of fuel. One wrong shot and the hostages would vanish in flame. She slowed her breathing, counted heartbeats. Inhale, exhale. The rifle cracked once. The bullet flew, arcing, drifting, time stretching into silence. Impact. The detonator sparked once and died. Perfect. Reyes' voice came through, ragged but alive. Direct hit. You just saved 5 people and my sorry ass. Wouldn't be the first time, she said. But as she watched, movement flickered, a militant running toward Reyes' ridge, rifle raised. They must have traced the sound. She swung the scope, found the runner and fired. The man dropped mid-stride. But others were following, 4, 6, 10. Too many. Reyes, you're compromised, she said. They're coming from your east flank, move now. Can't, legs gone. I'll hold them as long as I can. Negative, you move, that's an order. Overwatch. Move. She switched frequencies. Guardian Actual, this is Overwatch. Request emergency extraction. 1 friendly operative wounded, active engagement. Coordinates uploading now. No response. The network she'd once commanded no longer existed. There was no one left to call. She made her decision in less than a second. She left the rifle in position, set the scope to watch over Reyes' ridge, and began descending the slope. Every step sent fire through her leg, but she didn't stop. Rocks slipped under her boots, sand cutting through her gloves. She moved fast, too fast for someone half-healed, driven by a force that had nothing to do with orders. At 400 meters, she could hear the gunfire, short bursts, echoing against the canyon walls. She spotted him behind a rock, firing single shots, blood seeping through his pant leg. Reyes. He turned, disbelief flashing in his eyes. You, what the hell are you doing here? Returning a favor. She dropped beside him, leveled her sidearm, and took down the nearest militant. They fought like ghosts, 2 invisible figures hidden by terrain and skill, cutting down enemies they couldn't afford to count. When it was over, the valley was silent again. Reyes slumped back, breathing hard. You shouldn't have come. Tell that to the hostages, she said, pulling a tourniquet from her pack and cinching it around his thigh. He winced. They'll court-martial you for this. Can't court-martial what doesn't exist. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a wheeze. An hour later, the sound of rotor blades cut through the heat haze. Foster had come through after all, an unmarked medevac dropping into the valley like salvation disguised as noise. The downwash threw sand into Stella's face as medics rushed them both. Reyes grabbed her wrist before they lifted him. You always said the hardest part wasn't pulling the trigger. She nodded. It's deciding when to stop. Did you? He asked. She hesitated. Maybe this time. He smiled faintly. Then you finally taught yourself something. They took him away first. When the medic turned to her, she shook her head. I can walk. But when she stood, her leg nearly gave out. The medic caught her arm. Ma'am, you're bleeding. She looked down, her sleeve was soaked crimson. Shrapnel, she hadn't even felt it. She laughed once, always something. They got her aboard. In the helicopter, Foster sat across from her, headset pressed tight, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. You disobeyed every order you've ever been given, she said over the engine noise. Wouldn't be the first time. Foster's expression softened. You saved him. You saved the hostages. That's not what this was about, was it? Stella stared out the window, the desert stretching endless and gold beneath them. It was about finishing the story right, she said. Foster nodded slowly. Command will never acknowledge this. I don't need them to. Then what do you need? Stella looked back at her. Closure. When the helicopter reached the coast, the light was changing, orange bleeding into blue, the sea catching fire under the sunset. Reyes was loaded into another craft, bound for a hospital. Stella stayed behind on the landing pad, her cane forgotten somewhere in the dust. Foster approached quietly. You know this is it, right? There won't be another call. I know. Then what will you do now? Stella looked out at the horizon, where the sun sank into the water like a slow promise. Disappear properly this time, she said. Maybe teach somewhere quiet. Maybe just listen to the wind for once instead of measuring it. Foster nodded. If anyone's earned that, it's you. They stood there for a long moment, saying nothing. The ocean wind tugged at their sleeves, carrying sand and salt and memory. Finally, Foster said, We'll leave your record sealed, but some of us will remember. Stella smiled. That's enough. That night, from the window of the small coastal base, she watched the lights of a cargo ship drifting across the dark water. For the first time, she felt no urge to move toward it, no itch to chase the next mission. She realized the war inside her had gone quiet. Not gone, just quiet. And that was enough. Because sometimes the final act of service isn't saving anyone else. It's allowing yourself to be saved by the silence you've earned. Somewhere far inland, the desert wind still whispered through the tall grass of forgotten valleys. And if you listened closely, you might think you heard a voice in that wind, calm, steady, unafraid. Not speaking, just watching. The kind of voice that never needed recognition. Only purpose. Sometimes the mission ends. Sometimes it doesn't. But the true guardian always knows when to put the rifle down and let the world keep turning without her. Because dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. How do you know when a story's almost over? Sometimes it's not the silence. It's the calm before a choice. The coordinates on the stolen drive led Stella and Reyes to an abandoned airfield outside Asheville, one that had once served as a covert guardian testing ground. The kind of place only a handful of people ever knew existed. Now weeds cracked through the tarmac. Hangars stood hollow, roofs sagging under years of rain. But beneath it, according to the file, someone had reactivated the underground command bunker. Someone calling themselves Guardian 6. They arrived under moonlight. The air smelled of rust and pine sap. Reyes moved slower now, the limp heavier in the cold. Stella could see the stiffness in his shoulders, but he said nothing. Last time we were here, he murmured, you told me this place would stay buried. It should have, she said. They reached the access hatch near the southern hangar. Stella knelt, brushed away dirt, found the keypad. Same design she'd used years ago. Only this time, someone else had changed the codes. She smiled faintly, clever. Then she pulled a shaped charge from her pack. Step back. The explosion was small, efficient, surgical. Metal peeled like paper. They descended the rusted ladder into the dark. Inside, the air was stale. Long corridors lined with flickering lights. Faint hum of backup power. It smelled like old dust and something else, something wrong. They moved silently, weapons raised, clearing corners with muscle memory that never fades. At the end of the hall, a door stood ajar. Beyond it, the bunker's control room glowed in the blue light of monitors. And standing before those monitors, back to them, was a figure in desert camo, rifle slung low. "Drop it," Stella said. The figure didn't move. Then a voice, calm, almost gentle. "I was wondering how long it would take you." She froze. That voice. "Who are you?" The figure turned. And for a moment the world stopped. It was Vance. Her trainee. The one who'd once challenged her decisions, who told her she shouldn't have gone to Yemen. The one who disappeared a year ago, listed as missing, presumed dead. "Hello, Commander," he said. "Or do I call you Overwatch again?" Reyes stepped forward, disbelief breaking through the soldier's mask. "Vance, Jesus, we thought." "Dead," Vance smiled. "Yeah, that's the point." He looked different. Eyes hollowed, skin pale, movements too precise. "What is this?" Stella asked quietly. "The correction," he said. "You built a program that taught us to fight in the shadows, then left us there. You shut it down, walked away, and let the people who needed us die. So I built something better." "You built a kill list," Stella said, "and Foster's on it." "She sold us out," Vance snapped. "Pulled the plug while missions were still active. Do you know how many allies died because extraction never came, because we were erased?" He stepped closer, anger trembling under control. "I survived that because of what you taught me. I waited a year in exile thinking you'd come back. You didn't. So I did what Guardians do, I adapted. By killing your own. By finishing what you started." Stella's voice softened. "You're wrong, Vance. We weren't supposed to be ghosts forever. We were supposed to make the world quiet enough to put the rifles down." He shook his head. "That's the lie they fed you. The world doesn't stop needing people like us, it just forgets to thank us." Behind her, Reyes whispered, "He's wired the bunker." Stella saw it too, the faint red LEDs along the walls, the shape of C4 lined around the power conduits. "Fail-safe," Vance said, "if anyone tried to stop me." She lifted her weapon slightly. "Don't make me do this." He smiled, and there it was again, the boy she'd trained, buried under bitterness. "You already did, Commander, years ago." The next moment moved like lightning. He drew first. She fired a split second later. 2 shots, 1 scream. Reyes ducked behind the console, returning fire. Sparks rained down. Vance staggered but didn't fall, blood blooming through his sleeve. "You taught me too well," he said. "Always double tap." Then he fired again, rounds ricocheting off the steel bulkhead. A bullet grazed Reyes' shoulder. Stella moved low, fast pain flaring through her leg, but ignored. She rolled behind a console, checked her mag, waited for the rhythm of his fire. When the pause came, she rose and shot. Once, twice. Vance fell back, hitting the control board, blood streaking across the screens. The alarms blared instantly. Red lights flashed. A timer appeared on the monitors. 0200. Detonation sequence engaged. "Reyes." "I see it." He limped to the panel, typing furiously. He locked it. "Remote trigger. Can't disarm from here." Stella looked at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the charges. The sound was everywhere. "How far's the blast radius?" "Too far." She nodded once, calm. "Get out." Reyes froze. "No." "Get out," she repeated. "Now." "Rivera, don't." She grabbed his vest, dragged him toward the ladder. "That's an order." "Not anymore," he said, voice breaking. Her eyes softened. "Always." She shoved him toward the exit. He hesitated, then saw something in her expression, something final. He climbed. When he disappeared above, she turned back to Vance. He was on the floor, blood pooling, breath rattling. "You don't have to die for this," she said. He smiled faintly. "Neither did you." The timer ticked, 00:58. She crouched beside the control core, a web of wires and blinking lights. There was one way to stop it: manually cut the detonator circuit from inside the primary fuse chamber. A chamber lined with pressure sensors. Anyone opening it would trigger the blast, unless they kept the pressure constant. She designed it that way. Reyes' voice echoed faintly from above. "Stella, we can evac, there's time." "There isn't," she whispered. She unscrewed the fuse cover, steady hands working despite the heat and pain. The timer hit 00:31. She smiled to herself. Always one more right shot. Then she reached in and pulled the primary circuit connector free. For a second, everything stopped. The hum, the lights, even her heartbeat. Then a flash of white. The explosion tore through the valley, bright enough to turn night into day. The old hangars collapsed inward, flames curling into the sky. Reyes was thrown to the ground outside, dust and heat slamming into him like a wave. He covered his head until the roar faded, then stumbled to his feet. The hatch was gone, the bunker reduced to twisted metal and smoke. "Stella," he shouted, voice raw. "Rivera." No answer. He fell to his knees. The shockwave echoed through the trees, then silence, heavy, unbroken, infinite. Somewhere inside that silence, he thought he heard her voice again, calm, steady, carried on the wind. "You don't shoot because you can. You shoot because someone has to." He stayed there until dawn. When the recovery team arrived hours later, they found the site still smoldering. Colonel Foster climbed out of the lead vehicle, face pale but composed. "Any sign?" she asked. Reyes handed her the locket he'd found half buried in ash. "Just this." Foster closed her hand around it, eyes glistening. "She stopped it." "She always does," he said quietly. They stood together, watching the smoke drift toward the horizon. Weeks later, a classified report crossed Foster's desk. Subject: Operation Sable terminated. Status: all hostile elements neutralized. Civilian casualties 0. At the bottom, in handwriting she recognized, someone had added a single note. "Guardian Overwatch, confirmed KIA, mission success." She stared at the words for a long time. Then she opened her drawer, took out a sealed envelope marked Personal Effects, Rivera S. Inside were Stella's dog tags, her field notebook, and a single page torn from its middle. It read, "If this is the end, let it be clean. Let the noise stop here." Foster closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she let the silence feel like peace. Reyes visited the coast months later. The little cabin still stood, untouched, empty except for the faint smell of salt and oil. He left her rifle on the porch, cleaned and unloaded. Then he sat on the steps, watching the tide roll in. The wind came off the water, soft and endless. He smiled faintly. "You made it quiet, Commander." Sometimes heroes don't die on battlefields. Sometimes they fade into the silence they created. So the rest of us can live in it without fear. And sometimes the truest act of courage is knowing when to stay behind, so others don't have to. The world won't remember Stella Rivera's name. But somewhere, in the spaces between gunfire and peace, her spirit still stands watch, unseen, unwavering. Because dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.